I didn't argue when she said it. I nodded, said I understood, and adjusted my plans like I always did. Money was the reason given, carefully chosen to sound final, responsible, unquestionable. I stayed home, covered responsibilities, kept things running while they were sorting things out. Then, scrolling absent-mindedly one afternoon, I saw the photo. First-class seats. Champagne glasses. Smiles wide enough to forget the story they'd told me. I didn't feel anger, I felt precision. The kind that comes when a lie collapses quietly and reveals structure underneath. Patterns, dependencies, assumptions I'd helped build by being reasonable for too long. I saved the image. I reviewed what I handled, what I controlled, and what the rules actually allowed. No scenes, no accusations, just timing. Because when people lie to exclude you, they forget one thing: you're watching. And I was about to let them feel exactly how that looks. My mother told me over the phone, her voice lowered like it was a shared secret. Money was tight, she said. Things were unpredictable. A vacation just wasn't possible this year. I stood by my kitchen window while she explained, watching the city move on without me, and told her I understood. I always did. Growing up, I was the reasonable one. The daughter who didn't ask for much, who adjusted expectations before anyone had to disappoint me. If something couldn't be afforded, I believed it. If plans changed, I adapted. It was easier that way. It made me dependable. My parents were careful with money, or at least that's what I'd been taught. They talked about budgeting, about sacrifice, about being grateful for what we had. So when my mother said they were broke, I didn't question it. I rearranged my schedule, picked up extra work, and agreed to look after things while they were gone, handling some matters. Life went on in its predictable rhythm. Work during the day, quiet evenings at home. I helped a coworker meet a deadline. I checked in on a neighbor. I filled my time with usefulness, the way I always had. No one likes feeling left behind, but I'd learned how to make absence feel like a choice. A few days later, I was scrolling through my phone without thinking, letting images blur together. That's when I saw it. A familiar smile, my father's arm resting comfortably on an unfamiliar armrest. The angle was unmistakable. First class, leather seats, champagne flutes. A caption about, finally relaxing. My mother's laugh frozen mid-frame, light and unburdened. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Not because I didn't understand what I was seeing, but because I was aligning it with what I'd been told. We're broke. The words echoed, stripped of their warmth. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. I didn't confront them. Not then. I put the phone down carefully, as if sudden movement might shatter something delicate. What I felt wasn't anger. It was clarity, the kind that settles in your chest and rearranges things quietly. Over the next few days, more photos appeared. Airport lounges, hotel views, meals that came with white tablecloths and wide smiles. Each image confirmed what the first had already said. I hadn't been excluded because of money. I'd been excluded because it was easier. I started paying attention in a new way. To how often I was the one asked to handle things. To the accounts I helped manage. The documents I organized. The errands I ran without being asked. I'd always assumed it was love that kept me involved. Now I wondered if it was convenience. When my mother finally called, her tone was cheerful, relaxed. She asked how things were going. If everything was okay at home. I answered calmly, evenly, giving her nothing to react to. We'll talk when we're back, she said. We'll make it up to you. I said nothing for a moment, then replied, Sir. After the call ended, I sat in the quiet and opened my laptop, not to distract myself, but to review things I hadn't looked at in a while. Records. Responsibilities. The invisible framework that had kept their lives running smoothly while they traveled light. I closed the laptop slowly, my reflection staring back at me in the darkened screen. Because now I knew something they didn't yet realize. Being left out had shown me exactly where I stood, and once you see that clearly, you don't rush to explain it. You prepare. When they came back, nothing was said at first. No explanation. No apology. Just souvenirs placed casually on the table and stories told, as if I'd simply chosen not to go. My mother talked about the flight being unexpectedly nice. My father complained about jet lag. They assumed the lie had expired with the trip. I listened. I nodded. I asked neutral questions. Calm is disarming that way. It convinces people they're safe. Life returned to its familiar shape, but my role in it began to change. I stopped anticipating needs. I didn't remind them about deadlines or appointments. I didn't volunteer to handle paperwork that had always quietly landed in my hands, not out of spite, out of correction. The effects appeared quickly. My mother called one afternoon, flustered. She couldn't access an account. Something had been flagged. She said, "You usually handle this." "I know," I replied. "But I don't anymore." There was a pause. "Since when?" "Since I realized I wasn't included in decisions that affected me." She tried to laugh it off. "You're being dramatic." "Maybe," I said calmly. "Or maybe I'm being precise." The calls became more frequent after that. Each one framed as temporary, each one assuming I'd step in once things felt uncomfortable enough. I didn't. I stayed polite. I stayed steady. My father reacted differently. He grew quiet, observant. One evening he asked, "Are you upset about the vacation?" I looked at him honestly. "I'm upset about the lie." That landed. At work, I noticed how much lighter I felt. My energy wasn't being split between obligations I'd never agreed to. When people asked for help, they asked directly. When I said no, it was accepted without explanation. Respect felt simple there. At home, tension crept in. My mother accused me of being distant. My father said nothing. I watched how quickly concern turned into inconvenience when my availability disappeared. One night, scrolling through old emails, I saw it clearly. How many systems depended on me quietly keeping them aligned? Everything was legal. Everything was traceable. Nothing dramatic needed to happen, just adjustments. The next morning, I made the first one, small, correct, irreversible. By the time my phone rang, I already knew what the call would be about. And as I answered it calmly, I realized something important had shifted. They were no longer relaxed. They were starting to pay attention. The attention came with confusion first, then urgency. My mother called early one morning, her voice tight in a way I'd never heard before. Something hadn't processed correctly. A payment was delayed. A form had been rejected. She spoke quickly, skipping over details, ending with the familiar line, "Can you fix this?" I listened all the way through. "I can't," I said calmly. There was silence, sharp and startled. "What do you mean you can't?" "I mean it's not my responsibility anymore." She tried reason next. Then guilt. She reminded me of everything they'd done for me over the years, as if support were a debt I was late repaying. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just repeated the same answer, steady as a line drawn once and not erased. After we hung up, my hands were still. My breathing was even. I felt strangely grounded. My father called later that day. His approach was different. Careful, almost respectful. He asked when things had changed. I told him the truth. When I realized being told we were broke was easier than being honest with me. He didn't interrupt. That alone told me he understood more than he let on. My mother didn't take it well. She told my sister I was being ungrateful. My sister told me I was overreacting. She said it was just a vacation. That I should have said something if it bothered me. "That's the problem," I replied. I was never supposed to say anything. I was supposed to understand. The words hung between us, heavier than any accusation. Over the next week, things unraveled in small but visible ways. Deadlines were missed. Mistakes were made. Stress crept into conversations that had once been casual. They weren't falling apart, but they were no longer comfortable. And comfort, I realized, had always been my contribution. I didn't celebrate their discomfort. I didn't gloat. I watched it with the same calm curiosity I'd learned to use everywhere else. Because for the first time, I wasn't managing the fallout. One evening, my mother asked to come over. She arrived without her usual confidence, eyes tired, shoulders tense. She sat on my couch and finally said it out loud. I didn't think it would hurt you. I met her gaze. You didn't think about me. That was the moment everything shifted. She tried to explain. About money fears. About wanting to avoid conflict. About how first class had been a last-minute upgrade she didn't think I'd see. Each explanation made the truth clearer, not softer. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I said, I don't need excuses. I need honesty and boundaries. She nodded slowly, like someone realizing the rules had changed without her noticing. After she left, I stood in my quiet apartment and looked around at the life I'd built independently. It wasn't flashy, it didn't photograph well, but it was mine, and now, finally, it was protected, because what they were starting to understand, too late to undo, was that exclusion has consequences. Not loud ones, lasting ones. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded slowly, the way reality usually does when no one rushes to cover it up. Responsibilities sat where they were left. Decisions waited to be made. Silence replaced assumption. My mother tried once more to restore the old rhythm. She called, softer now, asked if we could reset. She said families don't keep score. That mistakes happen. That I was taking things too far. I'm not keeping score, I said calmly. I'm changing the rules. That unsettled her more than anger ever could. My sister was less careful. She accused me of being cold, of punishing everyone over money. I reminded her it wasn't about money, it was about truth. About being told we were broke, while first-class seats proved otherwise. She didn't respond to that. She couldn't. My father watched everything quietly. One evening, he asked me to take a walk with him. We spoke about small things at first. Then he said, Your mother didn't realize how much you handled. I know, I replied. That's why it worked. He nodded. No defense. No excuses. Just acknowledgement. Over time, requests became cautious. They asked instead of assumed. They explained instead of decided. Inclusion started happening before plans were finalized, not after. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I helped again, selectively. When asked respectfully. When honesty was present. When boundaries were acknowledged. And every time I said no, it was accepted without pressure. That was the difference. The photo of first class stayed saved on my phone for a while. Not as leverage, but as a reminder. Of the moment the story they told me collapsed. Of the clarity that followed. I deleted it eventually. Not because it no longer mattered, but because I didn't need proof anymore. The behavior had changed. The dynamic had shifted. And most importantly, so had I. They never said, we lied. But they stopped lying. And that was enough, because the real revenge wasn't withdrawal or confrontation. It was forcing the truth to stand on its own, without me cushioning it. And once that happened, I was never asked to stay behind again.